I unmuted it. Thank you all for being here. I understand that it's Super Bowl Sunday, but as we all know, Alabama nor Auburn play in the Super Bowl, so we don't care. But it's good to see all of you having priorities here. I'm also excited because we have 5 shepherds now, and I think that's something certainly to rejoice about. I've never been part of a church that had 5 shepherds. I've been part of a church that's had 4, but I've never been part of a group that's had 5. And I think that's something to rejoice in, and I'm very excited about as we move forward with 5 shepherds, as the Lord continues to be gracious to us. If you'd like to take out your Bibles and turn to 1 Kings 21, we're going to tell that story of Naboth's vineyard. Obviously, in our teaching and in our preaching, we spend a lot of time focusing on God's redemption or God's mercy. And certainly that's a great thing that we need to discuss, and we will continue to discuss God's mercy. But there's also times when it's time to discuss God's justice, because certainly we all need God's mercy. But I would believe that Christians also all could say we also need God's justice. We need that, and that's a part of Him that's necessary for our lives to continue even into our eternal life. 1 Kings 21 is a story of God's justice because Ahab and Jezebel decide they need a vineyard, and God has to deal with it. And I'd like to cover that. Before we get into the story, though, let me try to bring it to a modern-day time period. Do you have to deal with manipulators? Do y'all have to deal with devious people that seem to be out to start problems and cause problems and try to undermine you in some way? I think all of us that at least have been alive for a little bit, we've all at some time had to deal with manipulators. And we hated every moment of it, having to deal with manipulators. There are devious people out there that just enjoy causing problems. And we all have to live in an earth that has manipulators in it. Many of us work and we go to different businesses. And in our businesses, we've had to deal with manipulators. Maybe we were able to accomplish some type of task and they took credit for it. And that made us very frustrated, and we felt like that was very unfair. We've been in situations where manipulators told our authority figures or our bosses that we were up to something bad, which was a complete fabrication. And we had to go in and deal with it and say these things aren't true, right? Many of us are in families that have manipulative people in it. And we have to deal with these devious people in our own family, right? We get into stories about he said, she said, and every time he said, she said something, by the time we get to the end of the story, it's not at all what he said or she said. Many of us have been in groups or situations where we had to go and sit down before some type of authority figure and they said, Andrew, did you say this? We heard that you said this. And I have to say, that's news to me. I had no idea I said that, right? But we have manipulative people that are trying to move us through, right? And there's been times when I've been trying to help the best I can with a family that has manipulative people. And I basically had to sit there and play Clue and try to figure out where the story changed. You know, I know this story went from this person to this person, but some person in the middle changed the story. And I'm over here like it's Colonel Mustard, right? We have to do stuff like that. We have to investigate situations because of manipulative people. And finally, there's manipulative people in local churches. And we've all had to deal with those folks too. I wouldn't say there was any manipulative people in the universal church because I don't think the Lord allows manipulative people in the universal church. But in the local church, they'll sneak in, won't they? Many brethren desire significance, and any chance they get, they'll whisper disgusting things about other brethren to just try to gain influence or destroy the influence of another. Man, what sick people are manipulators? Are those times that we demand God's justice? I think those are times that we do ask God to bring justice. And so the question that I want to look at for the time we have is, how does God handle manipulators? And it's nice to say that it's not a pretty situation. God does handle manipulators, and he deals with them in the authoritative way that only he can. In 1 Kings 21, we've got this story that we've already introduced, and it's concerning Naboth and his vineyard. As we move forward, there's two different ways I want to look at the word manipulative. In this story, we're going to be talking about this second definition of manipulative, that Jezebel and Ahab are controlling and influencing a situation cleverly and unfairly. And they're going to use deception to manipulate the situation. And that's going to be a bad definition of manipulative. And a lot of times when we use the word manipulate, we're talking about this devious or wicked manipulation. But as we approach towards the end of our conversation, we're going to kind of go back to this number one definition, to just control. And there's a sense that we can use the word manipulate to talk about how we can change a situation, not necessarily in a wicked way, but we're just trying to manipulate a something or a device or something like that. Sometimes we'll tell people that are, I guess, are kind of geeky. They'll say, look, if you turn these dials, you can manipulate the machine. So there is a generic term for the word, but mostly we use this in terms of being devious, like we see here in 1 Kings 21. In 1 Kings 21, Ahab, the king, sees a vineyard. The vineyard is close to his house, and it belongs to Naboth. Ahab goes to Naboth and says, look, I want your vineyard. It's very close to my house, and I'd like to be able to have this vineyard because it lives so close to me. And he says, Naboth, you know what I'll do for you? I'll either go buy you a better vineyard, or I will sell or buy the vineyard for you for whatever price you deem good. And he says, we got a deal, Naboth? And what does Naboth say? Naboth says, why in the world would I give my father's inheritance to you? Now, maybe I'm reading into this a little bit, but knowing the type of person Ahab was, is this somebody you would want to do business dealings with? Maybe that's part of it here, but regardless, the facts is that Naboth refused. So as we continued reading on, starting kind of in verse 3, going on to verse 4, Ahab becomes distraught, and he stops eating. And my new version says he grows sullen, that he is so grieved that Naboth won't sell his vineyard to him. Don't get me wrong. There are many things in this world that are worth crying about. There are many things in this world that are worth grieving about. But coveting another man's field is not one of those things. And what Ahab, I think, proposes to us is that he's a loser. He's a covetous loser. And now he's all distressed about this situation that he didn't get what he wanted. Well, Jezebel comes to the wicked rescue. Let's read 1 Kings 21, verse 6. Jezebel comes in and asks Ahab, her husband, what's wrong. Verse 6 says, he said to her, because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, give me your vineyard for money or else. If it pleases you, I will give you another vineyard for it. And he answered, I will not give you my vineyard. Then Jezebel, his wife, said to him, you now exercise authority over Israel. Arise, eat food, and let your heart be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. Jezebel decides she's going to fix it for Ahab, right? Maybe Jezebel feels like her authority's been threatened, that her husband, the king, has been told no. Maybe Jezebel feels like she needs to exercise control of the situation. Who knows what her thoughts are here, but she decides she's going to fix it for Ahab. And it's not that she's going to go and try to talk to Naboth and work it out. She's going to be manipulative. And this is what we get in the next verse. Let's start reading now in verse 8. And she wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed them up with his seal, and sent the letters to the elders and the nobles who were dwelling in the city of Naboth. She wrote in the letters saying, proclaim a fast and seat Naboth with high honor among the people, and seat 2 men, scoundrels, before him to bear witness against him, saying, you have blasphemed God and the king. Then take him out and stone him that he may die. So the men of the city and the elders and the nobles who were inhabitants of the city did as Jezebel had sent to them, as it was written in the letters which she had sent to them. They proclaimed a fast and seated Naboth with high honor among the people. And 2 men, scoundrels, came in and sat before him. And the scoundrels witnessed against him, against Naboth, in the presence of the people, saying, Naboth has blasphemed God and the king. And then they took him outside the city and stoned him with stones, so that he died. Jezebel hatches a scheme, doesn't she? She decides what she's going to do is she's going to send letters in Ahab's name to the elders of the place that Naboth is from. And then she begins to scheme with what they're going to do. She tells them to throw a feast, put Naboth at a place of high honor, but make sure you get two worthless men or two scoundrels to sit on either side of him and then accuse him of speaking blasphemy. And now that we've accused him of blasphemy and there's been two witnesses, well, now the people will take him out and stone him. And Jezebel succeeded. The point I want to bring out of this, and I don't know how well you can see it on this, I think I underestimated the power of this laser projector. But what it says there is that they worked as a team. Manipulators often will find each other, and they'll help each other, won't they? Not only will they help each other to do something evil, but often at the same time, they're manipulating each other. Do you think Jezebel was a dangerous woman? Do you think they knew Ahab was a dangerous man? And that they're able to convince these elders of Israel to come and participate and have a man murdered just because somebody wants a vineyard. Not only are they able to get these elders to participate, but they get these two men, these two scoundrels to be the false witnesses, right? And what's sad is it doesn't seem like it was very hard for her to do. She does it. And of course, we can see the similarities between the way they murdered Jesus and the way they murdered Stephen. Same way, finding worthless men to come and make accusations so they can manipulate this situation and ultimately get what they wanted. I think something I've had to reconcile with, or at least make peace with, is that manipulators on this earth, they often get what they want. The world caters to them. The world works with them. They'll find teammates. They'll find people to help. And often they will get what they want. Now, as we move forward, I think they regret it. But they do get what they want. And Jezebel here got what she wanted, didn't she? And ultimately, Ahab got what they wanted. So what are we going to do? The manipulators have won. Well, if we move into verse 17, we see that Elijah, the prophet, is sent to Ahab and Jezebel. And he condemns what they've done, and he tells them that they're both going to die, right? Ahab actually humbles himself and becomes distraught of what he's done. And God shows Ahab some mercy. He says, you're not going to have to see these things fall upon you, Ahab, but it is going to happen to your family. Ahab, even in his humbled state, which y'all that have studied Ahab and Jezebel, we all sort of see the same thing, that Jezebel's the clever one, and Ahab's sort of just like a doofus that does whatever Jezebel tells him to do, right? But Ahab humbles himself and at least would have had some type of thought to leave this manipulative lifestyle and try to serve the Lord. But look at verse 25. Shows us something interesting about their relationship. Verse 25 says, but there was no one like Ahab who sold himself to do wickedness in the sight of the Lord, because Jezebel, his wife, stirred him up. Manipulators are often being manipulated by other manipulators. Man, I don't get that out. And Jezebel here's manipulating Ahab, right? And people like Naboth are suffering for it. Well, this thing has been proclaimed that they're going to be killed because of this. But when we move into chapter 22, I believe this is what we see. We see God manipulating the manipulators. That sort of what you sow is now what you're going to reap. And God manipulates Ahab and Jezebel both into their deaths, right? And certainly he has the authority to do so. He has the authority to influence these people to walk to their deaths. 1 Kings 22:19. We don't have time to read this whole story. This is a fantastic story of Micaiah coming as the prophet, coming to talk to Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, and King Ahab, whether they should go out to battle or not. And this is a great story. We don't have time to read this whole story. I just need to pull a few highlights out of it. So I'll publicly apologize to Nolan Baker, because I think this is his favorite. But look at verse 19, what Micaiah says to Ahab about whether he should go out to battle or not. And you can see what God is doing here to make sure Ahab walks to his death. It says that Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne and all the host of heaven standing by on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will persuade Ahab to go up, that he may fall at Ramoth Gilead? So one spoke in this manner, and another spoke in that manner. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. The Lord said to him, in what way? So he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all of his prophets. And the Lord said, you shall persuade him and also prevail. Go out and do so. Therefore, look, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these prophets of yours, and the Lord has declared disaster against you. Micaiah says that he knows the situation that happened with the Lord, that the Lord was standing there with his host, and the Lord has decided that he wants to persuade Ahab to go to his death. And he asks his host, well, who will go and do this for me? One volunteers. God says, how are you going to do it? He says, I'm going to get his false prophets to tell him to go, and that's how I'm going to persuade him. God says, that'll work. Go ahead and go do it. Now, people want to ask, what are God's hosts here? What are God's spirits? Who is he talking to? Andrew will tell you, I do not know. But I do know that there's many spiritual beings. I know that God has ultimate control over those spiritual beings. I know many of those spiritual beings work for God. And evidently, God in his infinite wisdom has a way of manipulating the manipulator. And he ensures that Ahab goes to his death. Not only can God come in and trick Ahab in this sense to do this thing, but God also tells Ahab exactly what he's doing. Because this is the story of Micaiah the prophet telling Ahab to his face what God's going to do to you. He's going to persuade you to go to this battle so you will die. What a power move. Maybe we could all just appreciate this for just a moment. God's the type of God that he can persuade you into doing something, and he can tell you that he is going to persuade you to do it and how he's going to do it, and then God still does it. You know, if I'm trying to work some plan against you, whether good or bad, if I tell you what my plan is, you probably aren't going to fall for it, right? But God can tell you what his plan is, and then you'll still fall for it. And that's exactly what Ahab does. Ahab goes to battle with Jehoshaphat. He tries to even disguise himself, but Ahab falls in this battle. God's able to manipulate Ahab, the manipulator, right? Now, not only does God end up getting Ahab, but he also gets Jezebel. Let's turn to the book of 2 Kings. Look at 2 Kings chapter 9. Even more years have passed since Ahab's death, and Jehu is now king of Israel. Elisha sends Jehu to go finish the job with Jezebel. Looking at chapter 9, verse 30. Now, when Jehu had come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she put paint on her eyes and adorned her head and looked through the window. Then as Jehu entered the gate, she said, "It is peace." Let me pause just a second. My paragraph moved on me. Verse 32. And he looked up at the window and said, "Who is on my side?" Who? So two of the three eunuchs and looked out to him. Then he said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down, and some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and he would trample her underfoot. And when he had gone in, he ate and drank. Then he said, "Go now, see this accursed woman and bury her, for she was the king's daughter." They go out to go bury her, and they realize what God has said has happened, that there's not much of her body left because of the fall, and also because the dogs have eaten some of her, and they're able just to do with what they have, right? Jezebel sees Jehu coming from her window, and it says that she even kind of put some makeup on to see this happen. Jehu doesn't even have to do anything to her. He just calls out to her servants. They're standing behind her of the window and says, "If any of y'all are with me, cast her down." And her servants throw her out of the window. Now, is it surprising that Jezebel is the type of woman that her own servants will turn and murder her? Or is this a woman that the servants didn't like? This is a woman who's manipulative. And what happens? Her own servants turn against her and kill her, right? This is the end of manipulators. Sometimes it's your very own that destroys you, right? And I can't get past that this is God's doing. That God told these manipulators that they would be manipulated to their death. And now they both have. Can God destroy manipulators? Seems like that's all he does, especially when we see many of these stories in the Old Testament. Well, I think that the next question needs to be, well, then why? Why does God take such an issue with manipulators? I think Proverbs 6 gives us a good answer to that. I'm going to put that up on the screen. Proverbs 6, verse 12. The proverb says, a worthless person, a wicked man, walks with a perverse mouth. He winks with his eyes. He shuffles his feet. He points with his fingers. Perversity is in his heart and devises evil continually. He sows discord. And let me just pause. What's the picture they're painting for us here? You know, here's a worthless person or a scoundrel, right? He shuffles his feet. He winks his eyes, right? He points with his fingers. This is a manipulative person. This is a devious person trying to harm others. But what does it say in verse 15? Therefore his calamity shall come suddenly. Suddenly he shall be broken without remedy. Was this true for Ahab and Jezebel? Yes, it was. And really, I don't see why this wouldn't be true for any manipulator, even today. Now, nothing miraculous needs to take place. God, with his own providence, can bring calamity suddenly. And he can make sure that manipulators are at least exposed, can he? And this is the end of all manipulators. Well, why would God take such a hard stance against it? It's interesting that verse 16 is the next verse here, and this is a passage I think many of us already know. Verse 16, as it continues, these 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are abomination to him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift into running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren. Are any of those things there not explainers of manipulators? A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that want to shed the innocent, right? Devise wicked plans, feet that are quick to run to evil, false witnesses that speak lies, one who sows discord among brethren. That's all the traits of a manipulator, isn't it? And what does the Lord say about it? He hates it. He detests it. So when we're in these situations where we feel like we're being manipulated to something evil, God hates it too. And at least in terms of justice, we can take some comfort in that. That it's not like it's something he's ignoring. It's not like something that we don't, he doesn't know about, he doesn't care about. No, he hates it. And that's why he acts. And he makes sure that at least something eventually happens, that eventually justice is brought. Let's turn to 2 Peter 2. 2 Peter 2 is sort of a parallel, bringing this into the New Testament. And I think it continues to shed some light on God's feelings and our actions in these situations. 2 Peter chapter 2, talking specifically about false teachers. Verse 1, Peter says, but there are also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them. And let's pause. Like, we've got false teachers here, right? They're in here and they're trying to lie. They're teaching something that's not true. And we just said they even denied the Lord who bought them. Now look at the next phrase. And bring on themselves swift destruction. Where did that come from? That's Proverbs 6, right? Calamity, suddenly. It's the same message. It's the same thought. Don't be surprised when they get pushed out of a window because of the things that they do and the way they live their life. Now look at verse 2. And many will follow their destructive ways. Did we not just have on the board that these people usually work in teams? And what is Peter saying here? Many will follow in their destructive ways, because of whom the way, the truth will be blasphemed. Verse 3, by covetousness, they will exploit you with deceptive words. Again, and pause it. I know some of us like to read, but I need to pause. Is that not 2 Kings 21? Covetousness, deceptive words. It's sort of a very parallel concept, isn't it? Next sentence. For a long time, their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. And then he goes on to give us some examples. He says, God didn't spare the angels that sinned, but he cast them down in Tartarus, right? He says, God didn't spare the people who died in the flood. He dealt with it, didn't he? And then he says, God didn't spare Sodom and Gomorrah. He destroyed them, didn't he? So he says, when you're dealing with these deceptive, evil people, God's judgment does not slumber. He's awake, he's aware, and eventually, in his own time, he's going to do something about it. Now, what is that supposed to do? That's supposed to comfort Christians, right? Now, maybe many of you are like me. And when you feel like you're being manipulated, your knee-jerk reaction is to manipulate them back. And at least for Andrew always has to tell that side of me no. You know, when I've been in situations, and not many, but when I've been in situations when I feel like someone has lied about me or lied about what I had said, and then I found out, what's my knee-jerk reaction? Oh, I'm going to get them. And many of us that deal with pride, you know, our pride self says, you're smarter than them. You can destroy them faster than they could ever destroy you. They'll never see it coming. This is going to be a good thing, right? And we didn't even continue, and we relish in these stories we hear about how manipulative people were taken over by manipulation, right? And I think many of our movies we like are about manipulative people that are destroyed by other manipulators, and they're the heroes, right? A funny story. My granddaddy had a neighbor that would shoot his gun or his rifle out in his backyard. And my granddaddy didn't like that because they live in a neighborhood and his daughters play in this area. And we all know what a redneck can do with a gun in Alabama. You know, people shoot in the woods, they don't even know what they're shooting at. And it seems like actually the state of Alabama has been kind of cracking down on that lately. They'll put you in prison for manslaughter now if you're shooting into the woods and you don't know what you're shooting at. But Granddaddy didn't like that. Well, Granddaddy one day saw him shoot a rabbit in their backyard. And Granddaddy starts thinking, this might be an opportunity for me to stop the shooting. A couple of days later, he goes outside and starts looking around the woods. Granddaddy does. He starts looking around like, okay. Eventually, the neighbor comes out and says, Mr. McCready, what are you looking for? Granddaddy looks at him and he says, I'm looking for my kid's pet rabbit. That's a funny story, isn't it? And we love it. My family loves telling that story. I still love telling that story. I'll keep on telling that story. We all smiling now. Why? Because we relish in manipulators being manipulative, right? We relish in it. But can wicked plans stop wickedness? Can pride stop pride? Can lies stop lies? It doesn't work that way. When I read 2 Peter 2, God never even here gives me instructions. You know, he doesn't tell me, well, Andrew, go get him back, right? I get in this mindset where I feel like even when it comes to like false teaching, that I have to protect God. You know, I got to protect God's truth. I need to be honest. I need to be sincere. I need to be clear, of course. I need to teach when I have opportunities to teach. I need to correct and love and rebuke. Don't get me wrong. We got to do all those things. But at the end of the day, it is not Andrew's job to protect God. It's God's job to protect Andrew. And there's some things that God can deal with. And when I try to help him, I'm going to end up hurting myself in the process. Here's the perfect example of someone who was manipulated, and look how they handled it. Go backwards to 1 Peter chapter 2. In a similar story to Naboth, here's Jesus having these manipulators try to put him to death and succeeding. But look how Jesus reacted in 2 Peter 2:21. He says, for to this you were called because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who when he was reviled did not revile in return, when he suffered he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. You know, we think we're clever and we think we're smart. None of us were as clever as him. But when he was being manipulated, what did he do? He did not revile in return. He did not threaten. He committed himself to him who judges righteously. And when we're being manipulated, whether it be at the church or whether it be in our business, whether it be in our family, what's our attitude got to be? We cannot revile, we cannot threaten. We have to trust in him who judges righteously, that he will bring us justice. We be honest, we'll be sincere, we'll speak clearly about what's going on. Maybe even in a situation we need to tell an authority figure and say, look, this is what's going on, this is dangerous, it needs to be stopped. Those things all operate in the realm of honesty. But we ultimately trust in him who judges righteously. We don't need to sink to the level here that we see in Proverbs 6. And thirdly, our last thought that I want to pull from this Proverbs 6 Peter connection, we pride ourselves in being clever. And many manipulators are very clever, at least the ones that do a lot of damage. You know, there are dumb manipulators out there, don't get me wrong, we kind of laugh at them, don't we? But there are also clever manipulators, aren't they? If a person just has the ability to manipulate and they're clever enough to do it, what should they be doing with their talent instead? You know, we did that secondary definition of manipulate with something devious. But that first definition of manipulate just meant influence. Is there another word that means that first concept of manipulate? To influence, but if you think of a word that it wouldn't be manipulating someone to their harm, but it would be trying to manipulate someone for their own good, or maybe for the good of the Lord, what word would we use instead of manipulate? Would we not use the word encourage? I think this is kind of wild. What are encouragers? Are they not manipulators too? Now, the big difference is there's no wicked plans. These are positive plans, but are they not saying things and doing things trying to influence a desired outcome? I think they are too, at least in that sense. But here's someone that really could be an encourager. What do encouragers do? Well, they state the obvious often. They don't lie, they state the obvious. And sometimes there are things that we all know, but it'd be nice when someone says it. You know, when people go up to brethren and they say, you did well. Andrew, I thought you did very well with that. What are you trying to do? You're trying to manipulate me into thinking I did a good job, right? But that's an encouraging concept, right? When we know someone's struggling in a situation and they've had to make a lot of hard decisions lately, and a lot of us, lately, have been having to make a lot of decisions, very difficult decisions. And we're able to go up to those people and we say, I think you did the right thing. What are you doing? You're trying to manipulate them to take heart. And we can succeed, right? Clever people can succeed in being encouragers. The opposite would be true also when we're trying to correct something, right? When we're trying to expect the best out of others. Sometimes encouragers say things like, you know what, I just don't think that was like you. I don't think that was like you to do that. That was out of your character. I just thought that maybe you would need to know and you could quickly correct that, right? Well, that's a very manipulative, that first definition, way to get someone to agree with you that they need to correct something in their life, isn't it? That's a clever way to handle that. People say, I know it was not your intention. I know it was not your intention to hurt my feelings. I know it was not your intention to say that. However, you did say it. I think we could quickly correct that, right? It's just an encourager being an encourager, right? Donna Pridmore used to always tell me, I know it was not your intention. She would tell me that all the time. Andrew, I know it was not your intention. I'd be like, oh, man. What I do now But clever people will come up with clever ways to encourage, won't they? And they have a talent to manipulate, but certainly not in a devious way. Do you remember also we talked about how manipulators often work in teams? Well, encouragers also kind of work in teams too. Manipulators will manipulate each other, and often encouragers will sit there and encourage each other, won't they? Sometimes people often say, and I've heard people say it, well, who encourages the encouragers, right? And I understand that there may be situations where we feel like we're an encourager and we feel very low and we're looking for some help. I'm not trying to put anyone down about that. However, it's not a biblical concept to think that encouragers don't receive encouragement. If anything, the Bible actually says the very opposite, that the people that usually do get encouraged are the encouragers. Here's another proverb, Proverbs 11. He says, the desire of the righteous is only good, but the expectation of the wicked is wrath, right? It's kind of our seeing the best intentions in people. Verse 24, there is one who scatters, yet increases more. And there's one who withholds more than is right, but it leads to poverty. The generous soul will be made rich, and he who waters will also be watered himself, right? If you're going to have this attitude that, I think I can encourage people. I'm not going to try to manipulate people for wicked plans, but I want to have good plans for people. And I want to somehow please the Lord with what I'm saying. If you go out and you water everybody that's around you the best you can, are they not going to turn around and water you right back? The proverb says that's exactly what's going to happen, right? If you need to be encouraged, of course, there are things that you can do. You can ask for it. You can ask for prayers about it. Those are all good solutions. But here's another good solution. If you need encouragement, maybe you should try to go encourage others. Because now people who water, they themselves are also watered, aren't they? That's what God says. And that's what I believe. The people that have always been the most encouraging to me and have always said things, obviously with the best intention is saying things the right way. You know how easy it is for me to go up to them and say something encouraging, something back? I mean, it's as easy as can be, right? Kindness goes around. If you sow kindness, you'll reap kindness. And I think that's just some of that flawless logic that I love that comes out of God's word. Thank you for your close attention. And of course, I don't know what anyone's going through or not what everyone's going through right now. But at least we can see that we all long for God's mercy. But there are also times where we can long for God's justice. And certainly knowing that we have a loving Lord that takes care of us in every situation. If there's anyone here that needs to obey the gospel and they're looking for God's mercy to escape God's judgment, that's also offered through the blood of Jesus Christ. We would love to assist you with that. If there's anyone here that needs the prayers of the congregation and they need that encouragement that works in teams, we also want to offer that. If you'll come forward as we stand and as we sing.